Presbyterian Church was willing to admit that.
Ha.
Yeah.
I like to think that, I'd like to say there's no slant, although I do try to give us a historical, focus from that. Yes, sir.
You've done in the past a class or two in which you spread out all the various works of that we've had in humanity to prove, not by faith, but just prove the validity of the Bible, the validity of Christ, and so forth.
Uh-huh.
That was very helpful to me talking to non-Christians on people questioning whether the Bible is for real and all that kind of stuff. So you went and you pointed out all the different texts at the New Testament that were there. That type of thing, if the class would like that, I would mind a review of that, because it helps me when someone challenges the validity of the Bible, the validity of Christ. So you don't have to have faith. It's a scientific fact, and here's why.
That would be a good one. I actually have proposed that to the church before here. I could propose it again. It's not that they're not happy with that. They generally like their Sunday school kind of things to be a biblical origin.
What I was looking at is just like one section, just a review. Here's how we got to this.
Well, I always do that. That is my what do you call it? My token and freebie, because I have to do that. That's what I tell you. When you go to a college class, right? I expect every college professor teaching you history to prove the veracity of the text they're using. Because that's how you know history. What do you think it does? Jumps from the mind of Zeus, you know? It leaps fully armed from the mind of Zeus like Athena? No. History is based on, you know, the validity of the text and the evidence that you have. So yeah, that's a freebie, but I'll always do that. I do have an extended class that I've done for other people that goes through the whole thing, and
I
even
can see why the church here may not want that.
Oh no, I don't think they would not want it. It's just that they're, like for example, they actually had me do the moral compass class. If you remember that, I thought that was really interesting that they let us do that class. That was a really good class.
That's 3 or 4 years ago. That was good.
Yeah, I've done it a couple of times, I think, here.
Acts.
Redo Acts?
Have you done Acts? How long has it been? I wouldn't have done.
We did Acts. It was one of the first New Testament classes I did. So why don't you guys think about it, and like we could take a vote, or if you want to, slip a note to me, write on a piece of paper.
If we did a short one like Jude or something, maybe we could do it in one quarter.
Yeah. Well, that's why I asked you that.
There you go. What about the books you didn't like?
The what?
What about the books Luther didn't like?
That's kind of why why we picked Hebrews. But yeah, Jude, Hebrews, 3rd John, James, and Revelation. I ain't doing Revelation. Revelation would open your eyes to a brand new world, but I think you might be disappointed. The Greek is bad, and it's just it's mostly an allegorical book. It's a very interesting book, but it's not what you really think it is. It might be worth teaching at some point, but I don't like going through that terrible Greek, the bad Greek. But anyway, yeah. Well, that's what I kind of tried to do. But also, you got to realize, you know, you guys have tempted me on or prompted me on. I asked you, do you want me to continue in this kind of fashion? And the majority of the class said yes. I usually try to make the classes only about 2 semesters or whatever long, and I can force them into one. But if you haven't noticed, there's so much in each. And so anyway, we'll just keep that in mind. And we are at session 107, but we're almost done. Maybe we'll get to 110. I don't know. We're chapter 13 plus. We're almost there. So the words of the day, and I put up the top because I want you to, we can't forget this, okay? This is the great Hebrew problem, but it's not the answer, it's not the total logos to telos. It's not the only logical argument to an unstated telos that we find in Hebrews, but it's one of the most important to the authors of the document, of the work. And so remember, the problem is the Eucharist. It's the Thanksgiving sacrifice. They got kicked out of Jerusalem. Paul said, hey, have the Seder. It's okay. And that's what, guess what? The Corinthians and the Thessalonians and all the diaspora that were kind of in the northern part were big into it. They were doing the Seder. Paul said it's okay. But then you have the other groups, right? And the North African church, if you know, this is another historical trace that we usually don't trace, but the North African church, which is a huge portion of Christianity and a huge amount of textual writing came out of that, what did they do? They did what Hebrews said. And so that's part of the thing, and that's what we're answering at the end part of the book. The end part of the book, remember, it isn't hugs and kisses. It's not, kissy kissy poo and, sincerely, and don't forget to, kiss Ellen or whatever, and don't forget to, tuck the kids in. They're using, the cost of this writing is so high that they're not going to waste a single word on something that's not of a critical importance to them. So even at the end, we've got important stuff. I've told you before, I call this the Fideus. Fideus, which means the teaching chapters. What they answered before, how are you convinced and what do you need to do? How you are convinced, which is really important. But the question is, what do I do about that? How do I teach others? What do we do in the retrospect? The words of the day, Thusia, Thusia. Thusia, to give you the notes right there, literally means rush, breathe hard, smoke blow. It's from thuo. Specifically means enthusiast, the sacrifice, either the act of the victim. And you see where this comes from, right? There's two big deep things here in the Greek worldview. We have sarx, which is the body. We have suke, which is the thoughts of the mind, basically the unconscious breath. And then we have pneuma. The pneuma, which is the conscious breath. The Greeks would have said that's free will. So thuo, or sacrifice, is an act of free will. It's a conscious breath. It's an act of free will to the gods, to God. But also, there's another connotation in there, right? Because the epithumia meaning the scent of the sacrifice. So what do you do when you smell that sacrifice? Not burning. They didn't burn the Thanksgiving sacrifice. They didn't burn all the Greeks didn't burn anything. The Greeks weren't to cook it. So they would slaughter the animal on the altar outside of the temple, then they would cook it up. So what was it all about when you smelled it?
Appetite.
Yeah, man, that's a steak of cooking. I'm ready, right? And when you only ate steak 12 times a year, you're like, okay, this is wonderful. So thusia, the word meaning to sacrifice, has these connections, has these connotations. The other word here, and I told you we kind of hit this, Anna, P-H-E-R-O-M-E-N, anaphero. Anaphero. Anna meaning, let's see, what does Anna mean? Anna means, Anna, up. Up. And pharaoh is to bring. You guys remember? We had there's two words that we had specifically. We had the bringing to the market. What was that? Propheros, and we had the other word. One was bringing to the gods, and the other one is bringing to the market. Propheros and I can't remember, exopheros, something like that. I can't remember what it was. But anapheros, what would upbringing mean? These are sacrifice words. These are words about sacrifice. What do you think to bring up in terms of a sacrifice is?
To raise them to your gods, because, the smoke goes up, so.
To raise it to the gods, which is what sacrifice? Do you know? What do the Jews, do you know what the Jewish people call that sacrifice? It's called the wave sacrifice. Remember that? We were talking about this. Back when I taught the Torah class about the Torah, the wave sacrifice is a type of sacrifice to God. And it's a very interesting sacrifice because it's very hard to tell what it's exactly for. It's very specific. But we're going to get some elements that talk about the anaphora. Anaphora, upholding it to God, presenting it to God. It's called a wave sacrifice. So anyway, we did 12. And so let me give you we need the sequence in, okay? 9, do not accept motley and foreign teachings, assigning a reason. Beautiful is the heart, the emotions, thoughts, and feelings that stabilizes graciousness, not sacrificial food, which is not useful when traveling. Remember, we talked about that. So not sacrificial food. So the most important point to note is this group, the Hebrews, and I have proposed that it's the group that went to Alexandria. So in the Alexandrian group, you're going to find the Council of Elders, the Council of Jerusalem. And the Council of Jerusalem told them what to do with meat sacrificed to idols.
Don't eat it.
Don't eat it. So they have a problem. The temple was destroyed. Now they're in Alexandria. There is a temple in Alexandria that's to God, that the Jews run there. There's also temples to the gods. Paul would have said it's okay if...
You don't participate in your brother.
Well, it doesn't bother your brother. Yeah, he didn't, all meat, remember, all meat except meat that is done by a kosher butcher is sacrificed to idols. And guess what? Okay, here's the other point of this. If it's done by a kosher butcher, is it good for sacrificial meat?
Why would you sacrifice something that's already been butchered?
Yeah, no, you can't.
Well, no, you don't. But okay. The Jews that live in Alexandria, let's say, if they want to
You
eat...
mean like a Greek person coming to a kosher butcher, would they buy it to sacrifice?
Well,
To bring?
okay.
as a gift?
So, if you're a Jewish person, you want to eat meat, and there's no legitimate temple, where do you got to go? A kosher butcher, right? Because if you go to the temple, what has happened?
It's been on.
Yeah.
The meat has been dedicated to another god, right? And so to the Jews, that's anathema, right? So you can go, but if a kosher butcher does it, is it sacrificial meat?
No.
No, it can't be teruma. It can't be the meat of the sacrifice or the meat of Thanksgiving. It's great meat. It tastes good, but it's not good for all those, for the, you're not reconciling yourself to God. You are eating a meat with the deity, which is a Thanksgiving sacrifice. You're participating in a sacrificial rite in the Jewish sense. We do the same thing with the Eucharist. We are participating in a holy meal with the deity. Yes, sir.
Review real quickly what a kosher butcher does that other people don't, other butchers don't.
The kosher butcher is supposed to kill the animal in a way that makes it acceptable in the Jewish Talmudic tradition. So, and we don't know when this started. I argue the Talmudic tradition and the Mishnah tradition. Of course, Mishnah tradition had to start really early. But remember when the Assyrians took northern Israel and southern Israel split up, right, into Judea and Israel. And so there was no legitimate temple. That was great. The king in Israel set up 2 illegitimate places to sacrifice meat. So nobody really worried about it for a while. And then the Assyrians came. And the Assyrians did what? They destroyed all the government and all the stuff and took the people away. Now how do you sacrifice meat? Well, they couldn't. So they figured out, and then when did the synagogue system begin? Well, early date says it was sometime before that, maybe in that diaspora or in the Babylonian diaspora from Judah. I'm an advocate of early date. Some people are late date. But it had to happen after Jehoshaphat. Have I got the right guy? Jehoshaphat. Remember Jehoshaphat? They refound the books of the Old Testament, right? And recopied them and read them to the people.
Isn't that Josiah?
Josiah. Get the right one for me. Anyway, you don't have to. It's one of those guys, right? But that was before, that was in Judea before the, look, you're asking me questions I didn't completely, you know, I tried to get the whole Bible, but not the, anyway. The Josiah, when that happened, that was before the Babylonian diaspora. That had to be the beginning of the synagogue system. Because the synagogue system, the rabbi, right? The synagogues are not about sacrifices. The synagogues are about prayer and study. And so the rabbis at that point began to teach the Torah and the Tanakh to the people and to the children especially. And they began reading it, right? Because that was the beginning of the reading of the books, of the scrolls in the Jewish people's lives. So that had to be the beginning of the synagogue system. I think maybe it started a little bit earlier, but there was that. So with the synagogue system, you get the problem, you get the kosher butcher fix too. The kosher butcher fix came with the synagogue fix. The synagogue was not a place of sacrifice, and neither was the butcher. But the butcher, by Talmudic standards, by the Pharisaic standards, would kill the animal in a correct way so that it could then be eaten as meat. As a matter of fact, now I don't know how they do this today. You'll have to ask your rabbi. But if you are a hunter, can you, if you're a Jewish person, can you hunt and eat the meat you kill?
Don't you have to have it slaughtered by a kosher butcher?
Well, you got a problem, because you're out shooting your buck, and
So you bring one with you?
There you go.
this is a problem for Jewish hunters, okay? I have heard that you're legal if you take your meat that you have killed to the kosher butcher, and they examine the meat to make sure that it was properly killed, you know, right? Properly, even after it's dead, if you cut the throat properly and there's a way of doing this, then you can get the kosher butcher to say, it's good. But if you do it wrong, you're in trouble. So be careful and make sure you know what you're doing. So I'm just saying, these are huge cultural things, right? You ever think about these? I do a little bit, but so I can help everybody understand them. But these are deep thoughts, right? Because I like venison. But where are you going to get it, right?
Well, it's a big deal to the people of that time.
It is a huge deal to the people at the time because
But we don't think of it.
well, guess what? If you're in Alexandria and you can't get a kosher butcher, how are you going to eat meat? Never, ever, ever. So you can't even get it the six times you normally would under Jewish, festivals. You're not eating meat. Now you go, well, that's what our authors are talking about, right? They said don't sacrifice to the temple. Anyway, we're here. Do not accept motley and foreign teachings, assigning a reason beautiful as the heart, the emotions, thoughts that stabilizes graciousness, not sacrificial food, which is not useful when traveling. We talked about that. It's 9. 10 is, we hold a place of sacrifice in which they hold no privilege to eat with those who minister the tent, which is reference to the tabernacle. 11, assigning a reason, the bodies of those living things whose blood is carried inward into the sacred place, the Holy of Holies by the high priest, all because of miss the mark. Miss the mark. I should probably talk about that, but we have already been over 11. Are burned to ashes outside the battle camp. The remnants are burned to ashes outside the battle camp. 12, that's where we were last time. Through which thing Jesus, and in order that he made holy the people through his own blood, he experienced sensation outside the gate. He experienced his suffering outside of the gate. So now we're at 13. Okay. 13. Here's the NIV. Let us then go to him outside the camp, bearing the disgrace he bore. That's the NIV. Let's look at the Greek. Okay. Let us go forth. Exerkoemai, to issue, therefore, ton none, truly now, into pros, forward, him, autos, himself, exo, outside, not without, it's the camp, it's parambola, a throwing in beside, and we've had this word before, parambola. I probably should have given it to you as a word of the day. See, parambola. Parambola. Para, near, bola. A near bola. Hey, this is really close to parable, parabola, right? Wow. Matter of fact, it's almost the same. Okay, a throwing in beside it is a parable, but they translate it camp. But through Luke and Mark and Matthew, it's always parable, because a parable, remember in Greek, they only have one axis, unfortunately. But a parable is a near throw. In other words, it approaches an axis, and by the way, the Greeks would say it crosses the axis at only one point. It's a little more complicated than that, because a parable is a logos to telos. It's a telos. We as scientists know when you take the limit of a function that is like this, I can do an integral and I can solve for it. And I can find out the area underneath the integral, which is really cool. And the Greeks knew this. This is a solution to Zeno's paradox. They didn't do it mathematically. We had to wait for the apple guy, Newton, before we got to this point. But before Newton, they figured this out geometrically, that you could actually measure the area underneath an incomplete parabola. They only had one axis, but they did it anyway, which is really cool. They're way ahead of us in some ways. But a parambola is a near throw. In other words, it's a logos with a singular telos, a singular conclusion. A parabola is, we don't know what a parabola is. Anyway, so here it goes, a parambola, a throwing in beside it. It's not exactly a parabola, it's a parimbola. So let's see, a parimbola compound, but it's literally pretty close to the same. It translates as a battle array or an encampment or barracks. So similar to the Tower of Antonia is a parambola. It's a camp. It's kind of a camp inside the enemy's field. Anyway, bearing Pharaoh, to bear or carry a Pharaoh, his autos himself reproach, onedissimos, which is contumely, insolent or insulting language or treatment. There's a word for it in English. We have words for everything in English, just we don't use most of them. Anyway, so here's the literal. We issue truly now forward to himself, outside the throwing in beside, to bear or carry himself contumely, insolent or insulting language or treatment. And here's a translation. We issue truly now forward to him outside the battle array, the place we have come, to bear the insolent and insulting language or treatment that was his. Okay, so the author, remember the previous text? The author said that basically, is a sacrifice necessary? The sacrifice is done, right? And this is true. We know this. This is true. The sacrifice is complete because the sacrifice for atonement is done. Remember, we have our 5 sacrifices. We have the ascension sacrifice, the guilt, the sin, the guilt, the priests, and the thanksgiving. And this is the problem. In the Messianic era, what do the rabbis say? What sacrifice is the only one required? The Thanksgiving sacrifice. However, the people in Hebrews, can they do the Thanksgiving sacrifice? Not legitimately. So they're trying to give an answer for that. So they said the point was that Jesus is outside. Jesus was put to death outside of the camp. And there's something really important about that too. I think I talked about it last week. But remember, in a Greek temple, here's a Greek temple. Greek temple, 2 parts. The altar's outside. If Jesus was put to death outside the temple, what is that outside of the camp? What does that mean for the Greeks?
It's valid.
It's valid and good, right? The problem with the Hebrew temple is the Hebrew temple looks very similar, except there is a wall around it. And to the Greeks, that was anathema. So for both the Hebrews, if Jesus Christ was, if he was put to death outside of the camp, what does that equate him with? The scapegoat. We talked about that last week, and I talked about it last week, but the scapegoat sacrifice, also with the what is left of the sacrifice. Because all the remnants, the bones and stuff were burned outside of the camp, right? But what it does is it makes it palatable to both the Greeks and to the Hebrews. It also does something else. Remember, what is the biggest claim against Christianity that always gets thrown around, especially by the Islamic world? One of their favorites. Cannibalism. And you killed God, right? I mean, like, this is not just Islam, but a lot of other groups, pagan groups, said, well, you killed God. Well, we did, right? But the God, Christ, came back. He was resurrected, right? And so the argument is that you sacrificed your God. But if Christ, God, was put to death outside of the mesoncline of the wall around the temple, what does that mean? He was not killed in the ritual sense like you would an animal, right? He was killed, you could say, in the altar of the world. He was put to death in the altar of the world. So there's a lot of stuff in here, because remember, and I'll say it again, this letter is not just to Hebrews. It's to Romans, it's to Greeks, it's to the Egyptians, it's to the Hebrews, it's to whoever else. It's to Teen Hodos, who happen to be, that Jewish sect that later was called Christians. So this is a huge and important thing, because it makes the message inclusive. It's like what you're talking about, Max. If we can talk to people about, basically history, historical truth, right? Then we can project to them the truth. And it's not just something we made up. It's not, here's the Bible, believe in it, or you're done. It's more, here's the Bible, a historically valid document that you can study and understand historically, and it has meaning for us, right, today.
And it's part of being convinced.
It's part of being convinced, precisely. This is the biggest problem. I think the reason we're losing so many kids in the church is because they were never convinced. Their basis of their faith is faith. And it's like, well, what kind of basis is that? That's the same as Islam or Hindu or the Bhagavad Gita or, Taoism. Yeah. You can't base it on belief. It has to be on truth. And that's what we swear to subscribe to, right? The truth that is in history that we were revealed to by our God. Which, even saying that, it's kind of funny, but yet I would say it's more like scientific or historical. The three means no truth. Historical, legal, which is not legal. It's not the method for whatever. It's not that method that people don't like for looking at Scripture. It's the historical, legal method we use in the courts to put you in jail. The scientific method and logic or reason, which were invented by the Greeks. Well, guess what? We're reading Greek documents. And so that's what we are doing, is getting a focus of the Greek. So we issue now truly forward to him outside the battle array, the place we have come, to bear the insolent and insulting language or treatment that was his. In other words, there's another thing in this too. So we go outside the city to worship. Here's Alexandria. Okay, whatever. Draw like Alexandria. In Alexandria, you got the temples, and you got the temple, right? And you got the Epi-Synagogue. And you got synagogues, you got the marketplace, you got all that stuff. But the authors are saying, where are we going to go to worship? Where Christ was put to death. which is outside of the place we have come, outside the camp in battle array, which gives us a clue to where they were meeting. There's more to this. The point of, we don't worship in the Jewish temple in Alexandria, we don't worship in the Greek temples. That's what the document told us before. Don't do that. And then it goes, we don't sacrifice, we worship outside the confines of the city. Because can you sacrifice outside of the confines of the camp? The Jews would say you can't, right? You have to be bound within the mesocline. What would the Greeks say? You have to be on the temple grounds, right? So guess what? These guys are setting up and they're saying, our worship, the worship that we're suggesting for the Hebrews, not the Hebrews, for all these people we're writing to, because I think they're writing to all this group. They're saying, where should you worship? Not inside of the confines of that city or place you came to. Not within the temples. They're separating the worship from the sacrifice, which to us is a meaningless thing almost. John Chrysostom solved it for us in 390 AD, something like that, with the Mass, Eucharist. So we don't worry about it. But at that time, they really did worry about it. And also, this really alludes to the Mysterion. Because we know that the early Teen Hodos hid in the Mysterion, worked through the Mysterion. Where do the Mysterions meet? Underground. And usually, we know in Rome they did meet in this, the city grew to it grew so that the places they worship were now part of the city. But when they originally were worshiping, where was it? They're outside the city, right? In catacombs underneath the area, but not the city itself. Rome grew just like Paris grew, right? Paris grew so they covered all the catacombs and areas. And Seattle did the same thing. Seattle has underground Seattle, if you didn't know that. So the places they were worshiping were most likely outside of the city. And if you remember, there's a whole bunch of Essenes in this group, right? This group is full of, got Pharisees, I got Sadducees, I got Essenes, I probably got a few Zealots here and there, right? Like Andrew, and I got Teen Hodos. So where are they used to worshiping? Remember the Essenes said you're not even supposed to go to the bathroom within sight of Jerusalem. Now Alexandria is not the same as Jerusalem, but that means that they were used to running at least twice a day out away from the city. This is just kind of funny. Josephus was an Essene and he didn't make enough fun of it. But anyway, so let's go to 14 because this continues. The same message continues. Here is 14. For here we do not have an enduring city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. Gar, assigning a reason here, Hode, in this same spot, we have echo to hold, no, continuing, mino, to stay, polis, a town. But Allah, other things we seek, epizeto, to search, one, it's not one, it's the, to come, mellow, to attend. So here's a literal, assigning a reason, in the same spot we hold, no to stay a town, no to stay a town, other things we search, thee, to attend. So here's a translation. Assigning a reason in the same spot, we hold not to remain a separate community. Assigning a reason in the same spot, we hold not to remain a separate community. In other things, we search the ability to get together with others, literally to attend their worship in conclaves. This is really different than the translation the NIV gave us. But I think it totally fits in the context because the authors before said, we're not worshiping inside the tent, inside of the city, inside of the place, right? We are worshiping outside. Assigning a reason in this same spot, we hold not to remain a separate community. What's been the whole message from Hebrews from the very beginning? Are you supposed to separate yourself from the community?
Get out and talk to your neighbor.
Get out and talk to your neighbor. But guess what? You got a problem, because now at the end they're telling us that for our worship, what should we do?
Go outside the city.
Go outside the city. Get away from all the other I don't think they would use the word heretical. They just didn't want them to participate in the stuff that was not good for their souls, right? So there's too much action happening, and they're telling them, look, you got to take some time to get away from this and worship the way that God intended for you to worship. But at the same time, the whole message of the book of Hebrews is to talk to your neighbor and involve your neighbor, right? So I think this translation from the Greek is just much better. Assigning a reason in this same spot, we hold not to remain a separate community. In other things, we search the ability to get together with others, literally to attend their worship in conclaves. They told us this before, right? And Paul would agree, and so would the Apostolic Fathers. I don't think the Apostolic Fathers or Paul would have a problem with you going to a Greek symposium, or to a Greek gymnasium, or to a Greek temple even, and participating in the activities, as long, what would Paul say? Paul would say it's okay if you don't participate in the worship of the gods. Paul even says it's okay to eat the meat, right? The Apostolic Fathers would say, on the other hand, you could go to those conclaves and those things as long as you didn't participate in the worship of the gods, but they would say don't eat the meat, right? So do you see this? This is, matter of fact, this is the focus of all the early church, because the early church basically took on the Mysterions and took on all the festivals of the Greeks and the Latin of the Greeks and the Romans, right? They didn't borrow them. They took them over, right? And I've told you before, you know, just think about it, okay? So you're going to the Dionysian festival and they're handing a liter, you know, the adults get 2 liters of wine and the kids get 1 liter of wine. And your kid is expected to drink themselves into pure inebriation, to drink the whole of that wine. And you, as the church, right, are at that festival and you say, hey, we've got wine, but you know what? We've also got daycare over here. And we got a place for your wives and your slaves, you know, that they'll be safe, right? And you can participate in the festival, but we also have our teaching and our stuff going on, right? Well, where would you go? The place that was no daycare and the kids are drinking, you know, liters of wine, right? Or the place where, well, if somebody's going to take care of them, they're safe. You know what I'm saying? This is a way that they integrated themselves and the way they took over these Mysterions and these festivals in the Greeks. To the point that, well, Easter is Hestia. Yes, sir?
You know, as you explain this, it occurs to me that Jesus had a fairly simple approach and a simple message. But for some reason, man seems obsessed with rituals and regulations and procedures, which I think detract from Jesus' message.
Yeah, and what's really funny, and that's a very good observation, because what's really interesting about this is, especially after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, was there any doctrinal rights or of the church? None. There was none, right? The only ones they had were the ones that were left over from the Judistic Hebrews, from the Hebrew things. And, you know, Teen Hodos, right? You got Teen Hodos, you got Greeks, you got Romans, you got all these guys together. So what do? You know, a lot of the early church was determining how do we worship God. And of course, we know what they did. They went back and they borrowed the temple worship, the Ascension Prayer, the prayer the confession, the priest, the homily, right? And then the Eucharist. Eventually, John Chrysostom gave us back the Eucharist. So the church, look, the foundation, you know how complex the worship of the Jewish people was? Hugely complex. We look at Torah class, right? But suddenly, it went from very complex to, holy smoke, it's plain church, right? They don't even have a kitchen. It's plain church. You know, it's you don't, well, what are you singing your hymns to? You don't got an organ, you don't have a harp, you don't have a guitar, because they had those in those days. I'm being funny here, but you see the point. They had nothing, and they're starting from nothing, and that's why, by the way, they were they were great, and I don't mean this in a negative fashion, I mean this in a totally positive fashion. They were great infiltrators to the groups, because could you hold the, for example, the Mithrin Christmas festival and still be a Christian? Yeah, as long as you didn't do what?
Worship Mithras.
As long as you didn't worship Mithras. And the guys in Hebrews would have said, as long as you don't eat the meat. The Pauline guys say, hey, eat the meat, drink the wine, everything's cool and everything's fine. It's all good. But the point is that you can participate in all of these festivals, and at the same time, you're doing what David said, right? You're communicating with the people about this Jesus guy, about this God guy, right? And they may never have heard. This, you know, we could go into forever about that thing. But anyway, let's look at 15. Through Jesus, 15, this is the NIV. Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that confess his name. Here's the Greek. Bainia, through him himself, autos. Therefore, certainly, let us offer anaphero, to bear up a wave offering. Thee is added, sacrifice, thusia, sacrifice of praise, of anisis, a praising, a thank offering to the God, the theos, continually, diapas, through all. That tuto, that thing is, it's imi. Remember imi? The declarative verb, imi. Thee is added fruit, karpos, fruit of our lips, chelos, lips, giving thanks, homologeo. Logos. There's logos, an argument, a homologeus, a similar argument. I love this, right? Homologeus. At the same time argument, literally. To, the, his, autos, name. Onoma, name. 15 is literally. Through himself certainly to bear up a wave offering, sacrifice, a praising thank offering. The God through all that thing is fruit lips, that's good. To assent at the same time argument, the himself name. So we need a translation, right? Here we're putting it together. Through himself certainly we take up a sacrifice, a thank offering of the God. That offering through all is the words of our lips, which at the same time argue in Jesus' name. This is a really, 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 really important verse, especially translated properly. Through himself certainly we take up a sacrifice, a thank offering of the God. That offering through all is the words of our lips, which at the same time argue in Jesus' name. Whenever I talk about the name, the onoma, what does that connote? Everybody has a name.
Yahweh?
Right?
Is it Yahweh or the?
Yeah.
I am.
When I say the name, I mean God Theos. That is what, because the name is Yahweh, right? The unspeakable, the name you're never supposed to speak. But what does it do? It just said in the same, it said the name was Jesus is the name. Which means Jesus, which by the way goes right back to the beginning. It said at the beginning of Hebrews, Jesus is God. And so therefore, the name is Jesus' name. Through himself certainly we take up a sacrifice, a thank offering of the God. That offering, you notice, that offering to the Hebrews, to the author of Hebrews, is not any of these sacrifices, right? That offering is literally, imi. You know, whenever we see them write "imi," whenever we see the declarative verb is like, bang, they are really setting a point. It is the words of our lips, which at the same time argue in Jesus' name. So right there, they're telling you. Remember the verse before? Assigning a reason, the saints but we hold not to remain a separate community. In other things, we search the ability to get together with others to attend their worship or conclaves. In other words, through himself. In other words, it's not about sacrifice, it's about telling others about Jesus, or literally being with others to express him. So, when you go to the symposium and you're with the Greeks and you're talking about Greek literature, or, you know, the Romans are hangers-on, right? They can't speak very good Greek, but they're having a problem. So you're speaking Greek with the Greeks at a symposium, and the poor Romans are over there having a hard time. So what should you do?
Go to the Roman buddy and say, hey, do you understand what they're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And at the same time, they told us, if there's something you don't fully comprehend, we'll bring it up as a topic of the symposium. Guess what they asked in the Credo? Guess what they asked Socrates? They asked him about the creation of the world and the cosmos. That's what the Credo is about, the creation of the world. Well, what a cool question to throw into a symposium like a bomb, right? That's that one, if you will, right? That's the point. So they're saying in your dealings with people, and these dealings are obviously, are they on a, well, we already talked, they are on a physical sphere, right? Because of the gymnasium and the training, but they're obviously on a intellectual level, right? This isn't about, I don't know how to say it in our society. It's about talking to people so they're convinced about Christ. That's the whole deal, right? That's the whole point of Hebrews. This also answers a great problem. If you don't need a Thanksgiving sacrifice, if you don't need a sacrifice, it's from your lips of expressing about Christ. I don't require a Thanksgiving. That is the Thanksgiving sacrifice. That is the ultimate argument. That is, there's no conclusion here. Remember, it's a logos to unstated telos. So the argument of all of Hebrews is to give us this final part. That is, you don't require the Thanksgiving sacrifice. And the reason it's a problem is because why? Because the rabbis from the very beginning and in the Old Testament, well, especially apocryphal documents, it says, what is the only sacrifice required in the Messianic era?
Thanksgiving.
The Thanksgiving sacrifice. We solved the problem with John Chrysostom. We have it. Yay. But they didn't. And so this was a problem for their culture.
Don't you think that was really, I mean, that had to be such a relief to them to finally get to this point.
Oh, yeah. You know, okay.
Because that's a huge part of their culture and their life.
That's why I said these words in the Greek to these people, that verse 13, 15, is probably the most important verse to the early church that existed. The fact that they did not have to worry about the sacrifice anymore. They just had to worry about talking about Jesus. Yes, sir?
A lot of their whole economy was based on the sacrificial system too. It was kind of revolutionary that changes the whole culture now. We got to figure out something else to do with certain people.
Well, yeah, but they've had some practice at that, right? They go in exile. They botched it up so bad anyway before, so it's just another reset.
But a bump, right? Yeah. But you know what he says is really good. You know, the point, there's a huge point here. You know, we think, okay, so you shut down the temple in Jerusalem. Guess what you just shut down?
Economy.
Their economy is dead. No meat. No meat. No meat at all except for kosher butchers.
No need for shepherds in the fields and blah, blah.
Matter of fact, all those shepherds just lost their jobs. The shepherds that keep, the Bethlehem shepherds that are there to keep the sheep for the sacrifice, and all that, you know, to us, it's not meaning, it means nothing, right? If a church goes away, that's not a huge, you know, thing on the economy. But if the temple in Jerusalem goes away, or think about the Greek temples. If a Greek temple goes away, is there any food in the marketplace? Is there any meat in the marketplace? No. You know, you still got fish, but you ain't got no meat. It's huge. And the effect on the economy, because these people are raising meat for the purpose of eating it, but also for sacrifice. To us, it's like, oh, Oh, that's nothing. But it's like you were shutting down the whole meat industry for the United States of America, which would cause a collapse probably of the economy. Which is why, well, the Romans weren't dumb, but the Romans, that was pretty dumb to destroy Jerusalem. I suspect they ruled that day for a long time, because they usually didn't do stupid stuff, but that was really stupid, right? The Romans liked to take over stuff, and then they would control the economies, right? And they would leech off the tribute. So what happens when you kill the ability to get tribute, right? I bet, now, we know that, what's his name wasn't still around, what's his name, huh? No, the Roman with Christ, Pilate. We know Pilate wasn't around at this time, but Pilate would have been yelling. He would have been sending letters, because Pilate was, you know, he was really working hard to get tribute in a way that did not irritate the people, right? Pilate was, I don't care how bad you put Pilate. Pilate was really trying hard to get money that he could ship back to Rome without destroying the economy. So, you know, these are huge things. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen.
Did you talk about what you're gonna teach next time?
I did. And I told them to think about it. So we still have a little bit to go. Yes, sir.
Well, economically, Teen Huddles, you know, they still have the Mythos tree.